Tocho sampo pagyo trashi pa tuche tempe trinle yarmoda pelge drolor zampe zeparche lame shabla solvade Omo a guru vajradara sumatimo nisha saneka Uta vardanya shri bhadra varsa manya sarva siddhi hum Oma guru vajrad Shasane karma uta vardanya shri bhadra varsa manya sarva siddhi hum Oma guru vajrada sumatimo nisha Uta vardanya shri bhadra varsa manya sarva siddhi hum Oma guru vajradar Uta vardanya shri bhadra varsa manya sarva siddhi hum Oma guru vajradara sumati munisha sar Uta vardanya shri bhadra varsa manya sarva siddhi hum Oma guru vajradara sumati munisha sanekar Uta vardanya shri bhadra varsa manya sarva siddhi hum Dagi Chitsun Lama Tuje Che Nyamda Dala Tuje Siksu So Gebe Shesan Dala Tendo So Oyon Sunge Nawa Tsedo So Tsechi Nyingne Sowa Debe Tse Dechen Korlo Visu Lekshun Ila Sambe Dede Malupa Geme Lungi Drubra Jingi Lo Tsoni Sodan Diktun Shabet Dungi namke yin so lekshu ne labchen tsoni yon so zoba dan chera nye dun changra jingil chanchu pargi nyin tsen tukun tu nyu peme siodro lekshu ne chanchu drube gegen kunshish Dungi dela drubra chingi lo dagi lo na chela chokpad chemi samjurang emba shiwa dan chedan tumbe dudem Beme hunge drubra chinge lo dorna tingne tsera tamchet Techi pardo nega tamchet tu rese kyamne lama kele me tukche chinge dala siksus Gongyab drewe nyamda dachala jetsun lame tuche rabgong Kodan sunge nawa drame tu nyam sunyongwe kesan tobrash Kewa kuntu yanda lama dan drame cheki pela longchech Sadan lamge yenden rabzone dorje change koba nyur tob shoya pakyuke kudan dagi olu pakyuke sundan dagi nga pakyuke tudan dagi yi ten yerme chiktu chingi Makyuke kudan dagi lo, makyuke sundan dagi nga, makyuke tukdan dagi yi, ten yerme chikto chingi lo. Om Mahamuni Shakya Muni Swaha Om Muni Sashipuki choshimeto Tamari Ravalingashi Nidegyampadi Sange Shintu Mikte Ulwarki Drokunam Dashingla Chopar Shoyedam Guru Ratna Mindrala Kamniryata Yami Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapsuchi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchira Sangye Drupar Shoya Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapsuchi Dagi Chushe Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchira Sangye Druparasho Sangye Chedan Tsogi Chonamla Jancho Pardo Dani Kyapsuchi Dagi Chushe Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchira Sangye Druparasho.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Good morning. If we were to ask ourselves what Buddha did in a kind of generic way, also trying also to simplify Buddha Shakyamuni, what did he do? What was his job? Is not, it's not the right expression. What did he realize? What did he do? Why is he so special? Why is it so special what he did? One of the simplest way to explain it, in my opinion, is that Buddha not only found a way for himself to be in harmony, at peace with himself and with the with the world, independently of where he was, with whom he was, and what situation he found himself in. A state of peace, joy, stability that is long-lasting and stable, sustainable. But afterwards, he was able to share with those who were around him, adapting himself to the mentality and the abilities of each one, adapting to each one, showing how they can all reach this state of long-lasting peace and harmony. And at the end of the day, it's what we deeply desire most. If we go to see, regardless of the culture, the religion, the social, cultural context, economic context, human beings or not, from an ant to a cow, no matter who we consider, what we all want is to be happy and to not suffer. What we look for constantly, and in a crazy way, we do absolutely absurd things while we look. For example, when I was a child, there was this cartoon called, I watched it in Portuguese. It was like the crazy race. These strange objects of transport, and it was almost as if everyone put in so much effort to lose the race. They all wanted to win, but they did everything possible to lose the race. This is the image that stayed in my mind. And sometimes when we look around, even ourselves, it's not that we're perfect and the world is horrible. Often I have this feeling, like saying, once I wanted also translated, a book title came to my mind. How to Suffer Better. You want to suffer, do like this, which is the description of what we do. But what happens is we want to be happy. We don't want to suffer, and there are no doubts about this. But often we end up doing what actually increases our suffering, that takes us away from a state of happiness. But what's interesting is, at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. What do we want? We want to be happy. We don't want to suffer. It goes beyond anything. Why does art exist? Why does cooking and internet and haute cuisine? And you can list anything that man has created, to things that we love, to the things that we think are horrible, the best to the worst. Everything was created because at the end of the day, we want to be happy and we don't want to suffer. And we look through the best of our abilities, guided a little bit by our wisdom, a little bit by our ignorance, to try to be happy, to reach this state of happiness. The fundamental difference is that Buddha managed. And it's interesting that when Buddha Shakyamuni managed, he never showed any kind of presumption to have been the only one. He actually talks about many who reached this state before him. Never does he say, I managed, I'm the only one who managed, and I'm the only one who can. He said, I reached what we all want. And we can all get there too. What happened, though, is he needed to adapt himself, his way of guiding, of explaining to each one according to their mentality, to their abilities, according to where they found themselves along their life's path. And he taught in many different ways. Sometimes people ask me, Lama, what's the Bible of Buddhism? This is in the West. It's difficult for the Western world. Want to put Buddhism within the same paradigm and parameters as the monotheistic religions that are here. Even for there's always this desire to take, for example, Buddhism and put it in the same parameters as Christianity. For example, this happened even on a political level when the Italian Buddhist Union was recognized formally by the state. So when we ask what the Bible of Buddhism is, and we can say that maybe over the centuries, many writings of teachings have been collected. If we look, for example, in the Christian tradition, did Jesus write the Bible? No. How? The first parts, the Gospels of the Bible, when were they written? How much after the death of Jesus were they written? It was like 300-400 years. I'm the worst person to talk about this kind of thing. I don't know anything about Christianity. But for Buddhism, about 300 years after his death, his disciples got together and they realized that the same antidotes, the same stories. At that time, Buddha said this, that, and the other. For a long time, it was an oral tradition where it was someone. And so after Buddha's death, they said in that place, Buddha was in that place with these people or these beings, and I heard like this and like that. This person asked this question to Buddha, and he answered in this way. And it's interesting. It's said that at the time that people had an ability to memorize that was much greater than today. So like today, for example, you all hear a same story, and then when you go tell that story to others, they matched, they were consistent, and we're not able today to do the same. So about 300 years after the death of Buddha, they realized that new different versions of the same story started to arise, and so they clarified. So there wasn't this need before to write it down because it was all transmitted from person to person orally. But once the stories were no longer, they weren't matching perfectly. And so the sutras, Buddhist sutras, were written. The Tipitaka, the 3 baskets, they were put in these 3 categories, and there are about 102 volumes of written sutras. There's an enormous quantity of teachings. And within that, the various traditions gave emphasis to one part compared to another. And the first interesting thing is if we were to take all Buddhist teachings and put them together, there is a coherence, like steps of the same staircase. If we take certain teachings and we take them out of the context of the whole and put them face to face, they can actually seem contradictory. So they really need to be seen in the whole. I don't want to, we have so much to see, and I don't want to go on too long. Among all of these, one of the fundamental parts of Buddhist teachings, let's say that all the Buddhist teachings can be divided into 3 macro baskets, categories. How to train in morality, how to train in concentration and how to train in wisdom. The part of morality has to do mostly with our conduct, how we act physically, how we talk, how we think, how to interact with others, how to have a balanced, healthy life that's coherent with ourselves and with others. And this is what now I'm generalizing, but that's mostly what the part of conduct has to do with. It's a very important part. Here we talk about the practice of generosity, patience, enthusiastic effort, etc. Our behavior, essentially. Since we are not autonomous, independent people, we interact with others. So, what's a healthy way to behave and to interact with others and with ourselves? Mostly has to do with this. The other part, important part, talks about the development of concentration that says the strongest, the most powerful, most important resource that we have is our own mind. If we use our mind well, we can reach a state of peace and balance. If we use it badly, we can live hell in this lifetime. We can be in any place, and when the mind is sick, it's very complicated to say. A healthy mind in an unhealthy context, one is well enough. A sick mind in a healthy environment, one is suffering tremendously. There was a famous phrase by Lama that says, Sampa Sanyang. When the mind is virtuous and positive, virtuous, coherent, the paths and the grounds are virtuous and positive. When the mind is unhealthy and non-virtuous, unhealthy, then the paths and the grounds are also non-virtuous. Everything depends on the mind. And so we need to take care of the mind. What's important here is so that I can use my mind well. First of all, I need to know how to guide it, to direct it. Because, how can I say? Let's take as an example a fire. Fire is a very powerful element. And with fire, we can do marvelous things and horrible things too. We can sustain life, cook, do so many things, and then we can also destroy with fire. But before we're able to use fire well, we need to know how to control fire. And once I can manage fire, then I can choose how to use it. Another analogy could be a means of transport. Maybe I have a beautiful, powerful car, but before taking my car to a beautiful place, I need to know how to drive it. If I don't know how to drive, it's useless to say that I want to take the car and go there. So what has to do regarding concentration? Just in a few words, it has to do with learning how to drive our own mind, how to control our own being, how to direct ourselves with awareness. And there's a very detailed, long part that we can enter into. It's the fundamental part, how to train in concentration, where we learn how to take the reins of our mind, where we learn how to direct our mind, where we direct it, where we want to go for the length of time that we want, etc. For most of us, are we able to direct our mind with awareness, or is it more or less the fruit of it's a result of what we live? I mean, how do we experience our mind? We live as if our mental state, we live as if we're kind of the victim of what happens around me. I'm joyous because of this. I feel sad because of that. I tell my mind to stay still here, and I hear noise over there, and my mind follows. So that second fundamental part of Buddhist teachings have to do with how to direct the mind and develop this concentration and inner stability. A stability that is extremely important as a tool. Imagine learning how to fly a plane or drive a car, but then right away the question is, what do I do? What do I do with this fire that I can control, this car I can drive, this plane I can fly? And here the third training comes into play, which is training in wisdom. Wisdom has to do with it's a view that matches, that is coherent with the world and the reality of ourselves. Wisdom has to do with a worldview that brings towards harmony and peace. On the other hand, it's a paradigm. It's a way a paradigm instead, on the other side, a paradigm that would take us to the opposite. The opposite would be that which takes us to disharmony and sickness. I'm just trying to give you the context of the Heart Sutra. Suffering, generally speaking, comes from our conduct, our way of interacting with the world and ourselves, the way of acting that is unhealthy, that shows up as anger, resentment, attachment, dissatisfaction, fear, arrogance, miserliness, sadness, etc. These so-called mental defilements through which we interact with the world and that lead us to a state of malaise, this interaction is called karma. So karma is not a kind of destiny. Karma literally means action. But to understand it better, we could also translate it as interaction. In every moment we're interacting physically, verbally, mentally. This is karma. And every interaction brings a transformation, and that is the result of karma. But our interaction, we interact physically, verbally, mentally, often guided by anger, jealousy, envy, attachment, dissatisfaction, resentment, fear, etc. And at their time, they come from the basis of all of this, which is this obsession with self-gratification. The fact that each one of us, we are the most important thing that exists, the most important thing that has ever existed in this universe. That's how we live ourselves. In other words, it's our inability to interact with anything, any being, without putting this filter of I and my between. Everything takes a meaning when it's in function to myself. So we all relate through this. This obsession with self-gratification is described, without getting into details now, described as the main cause to our suffering. Because the attitudes like anger, jealousy, attachment, they come from this obsession of gratification, which comes actually from the so-called ignorance of grasping to reality in an incoherent way. And now I'm just giving you an overview, a summary. It's a summary of the summary, the essence of essence, and then we'll go through it more slowly. But the point is that we relate to reality in a way that doesn't match its existence. We live a subjective reality as if it appeared to us as being objective, and we relate to this subjective reality as if it were objective. We perceive and we relate with everything as if everything existed in an autonomous, independent, objective way, when instead everything exists in an interdependent and subjective way. And then we'll get into the details here. This way of interacting on a very deep level, this relates both to ourselves and also with the world, where we see everything as being separate. This is what we consider to be ignorance. This ignorance causes, it's the primary cause of selfishness and anger and jealousy and envy, anger, everything. It's the primary cause of suffering. Let's imagine a poisonous plant. I can cut the leaves and take away the fruit or the branches. I can even cut the trunk of a poisonous plant. But to make sure that that plant doesn't, to take away that plant, I need to take away the roots at the deepest level. Here, for example, it's not poisonous, but it's a plant. It's a plant that's really, there's a plant here that it just grows everywhere. And it just grows very quickly. It's very invasive. And I've seen many people that they talk about how to get rid of this plant, but it's really difficult, because as soon as there's a tiny root, it takes over. So as similarly, as long as our ignorance is present, even when we cut away all the branches of anger and dissatisfaction and envy, we cut many branches, and we cut even the trunk of selfishness. But if there's a root, little by little, what happens? It just grows again. It comes back. In that first training in morality, we learn how to face our way of speaking and acting, so we can already cut those branches, which is already a lot. But to take it all away, our ignorance, and reach a balanced state on a deeper level, we need to know how to go towards the root. And here, our root, this is our paradigm, our worldview in its deepest aspect. Let me give you an example. Years ago, I read an article that described a quantic computer. I don't know if you've ever read how a quantic computer works. Maybe many people not many people have. So a normal computer, which are binary, how does a binary computer work in very simple terms? 1 and 0, which means is there and is not there, on, off. So there are many variations. It's off, 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 on, and then all the calculations are done, and our whole world can be represented by these two states of on and off. A quantic computer doesn't work in a binary system, but it works within a quantic system, which is qubits, these quantic bytes. So instead of 2 possibilities, there are 4. So in a binary computer, we have there or not there, and the possibilities with a quantic computer, there, not there, there and not there at the same time, and che and che, something like that. I remember when I read it, that fourth one I didn't understand. I read it many times, but how is it possible that it can be there and not there at the same time? The reality is that it goes beyond our own paradigm. Then quantic computers on a physical level, they're not just theoretic, they're not just theory, they actually exist. But when we talk about quantic physics and we try to apply it to our lives, because if we look historically, every time that there's been a scientific study or some kind of important discovery in physics, after a certain time, that discovery becomes part of the common view. It transforms our common view of reality. For example, gravity, many other examples I could give you. Instead of quantic discoveries have not been able to do the same, even after a long time. What is taught at school still, we're still talking about Newtonian physics. We're still working with this binary system of there or not there. But here we're talking about a change in paradigm. The paradigm is something that is deeply within us. It's the system through which we experience and live our reality. And when Buddha talks to us about the correct view of reality, the third training of wisdom, what he's talking about is a change in paradigm that is very deep and very difficult. Sorry if I say it like this. And that's why it's a long path. First, we talk about a change of paradigm on a conceptual level, which is not a real change in paradigm, to gradually bring that conceptual change to an experiential change. At that point, that new paradigm, you become that without having to think about it at all. And that requires time. So to eliminate completely suffering, Buddha explained, what I understood at least, that it's not enough to have control and have a have control over one's conduct and have a healthy life, which is already a lot. It's not enough to control our mind and guide it, which is already a tremendous amount. We need to deeply change our paradigm. Okay. And taking the analogy from before, the Newtonian physics and the quantic physics, even the quantic the world according to quantic physics is very similar to what Buddha Shakyamuni described, actually. And he talked a lot about this. Among all the sutras of Buddha, the sutras that talk about this change in paradigm, this change of worldview, where we start from a worldview where everything exists in an autonomous, independent, objective, separate way, to a paradigm where we understand and experience that everything exists in an interdependent, the mutually dependent, where one thing doesn't exist without the other, where everything that exists, the object that the object of perception and the perceiver are mutually dependent. What I am in this moment doesn't exist independently from all of you sitting here now. This change of paradigm, the process to go from this objective, autonomous, independent reality to the paradigm where reality is lived in an interdependent way, is called the process of perfecting, the perfection of wisdom. So the sutras, the teachings that talk about this, these are the sutras of the perfection of wisdom. Perfection is the translation of paramita from Sanskrit. Actually, and it's perfection is not the greatest of translation. Paramita in Tibetan, it's called parchin. Parchin in Tibetan, it can be used in two different ways. It means arriving beyond and going beyond. So this concept of perfecting means taking an ability of seeing the world, this perfection of wisdom. Let's remember that wisdom is this inner state of being that perceives reality in a coherent way, a way that matches let's call it the new paradigm using today's terminology. It's the mind that perceives the world as being interdependent, etc. This would be wisdom. So perfecting wisdom means bringing that mental state from a conceptual level, gradually training in that, so that conceptual level becomes deeper and deeper and non-conceptual until there's an actual change in paradigm. This process from the conceptual to that deep change is called this process of perfecting or going beyond. And one has reached that one once has gone beyond. So the sutras, these teachings of Buddhas that talk about this, are called the teachings of the perfecting of wisdom. Paramita means to go beyond. Beyond what? Beyond suffering, beyond the paradigm that we find ourselves in today. The sutras of the perfection of wisdom exist in many different versions. The longest one is 100,000 verses, and there are many volumes, and it's very, very long. Very few people actually read them. And then another time he taught the Sutra of the Perfection of Wisdom in another context. He gave the same teachings in a shorter version, and instead of 100,000 verses, the 20,000. And then there's the Sutra of the Perfection of Wisdom in 10,000 verses. In 8,000 verses, or the very brief version. So the diamond Dorje Chupa, the diamond cutter version, so much shorter, a couple hundred verses, And then there's the essence of the sutra of the perfection of wisdom. And let's say that the known title is Heart Sutra, but if you look at the actual title in Sanskrit, the word heart is not there. The actual it's the in the original title it's the essence, Nimpo in Tibetan. Ning is heart, Ningpo is essence. Even in our languages, we can say, what's the heart of the question? What's the essence? So if we were to take the name of the sutra, it would be the Sutra of the essence of the perfection of wisdom. And now I'll give you the transmission of the sutra. It's just a few pages. So we even have the phonetics here in English and Tibetan, and it's 11 pages compared to 100,000 verses, 20,000 verses, 8,000 verses. The other day I was reading the Sutra of Perfection of Wisdom in 10,000 verses, and you need a lot of patience because it's written in a very repetitive, long way. There are many details. It's very detailed, and for most of us, it's difficult to understand. So we have this great luck that Buddha taught that the Sutra of the Perfection of Wisdom in a very in a very brief way. At a certain point, his disciples that he taught it in a very detailed way, and then his disciples got together and they said, well, what was the essence of this? And Shariputra, here example, when you have this representation of Buddha, then your two disciples on each side, one on the left side, one on the right side. On the left side is Shariputra, and to the right is Mangalariputra. Modgilani put in Tibetan, Modgilani Putra. These are the two main disciples of Buddha. Shariputra was known as the one who had a very advanced and developed intellectual ability, and Moggallaniputra had this ability to do magic and outer worldly things. And then talking to Avalokitesvara, they talk in a very simple way. So the disciples came together. They said, what was the essence? And they summarized it here. It's what we have here, which is the essence of the perfection of wisdom, the so-called Heart Sutra. Why is this important? Because there's the essence, the key to gradually change our paradigm. In the Sutra, the perfection of wisdom, and in this case, the essence of the Sutra of the perfection of wisdom, because if we understand this sutra well, we can then also understand the contents of the longer sutras. Everything that is there is explained in a very reduced way. It's almost cryptic because many concepts put in one word, and we'll go through it together. But it's important that this sutra shows us two things mostly. What is the correct view of reality? What is the paradigm that Buddha transmitted? And how can we travel? How can we go from our paradigm to the one that Buddha transmitted? How can we make this transformation? How can we walk this path? Not only is there the essence of the Sutra of the Perfection of Wisdom in these few pages, but it also transmitted the same in just a few words. And I'd like to introduce this sutra with a different, coming from a different direction. Instead of taking the sutra and reading it together passage by passage, which we will do, I'd like to go to the more essential part, which is the mantra. Because once we've understood the mantra, then we understand the sutra well. And once we've understood the sutra of the essence, then we can understand the sutra in 8,000 verses, etc. And one last thing about this point. When we talk about the Mahayana, Vajrayana, Tibetan Buddhism, we ask, what that question from before, what's the Bible, the main readings? I don't mean all, but most teachings that we follow within our Tibetan Buddhist lineage, they are commentaries on the sutra, the Sutra of the Perfection of Wisdom of 8,000 verses. So Nagarjuna. If you look behind me, do you see this kind of blue window and above you at the center there's the image of Buddha Vajradhara. It's let's say that that's Buddha in his subtle form, and on the right is Buddha Maitreya, and on my left there's Manjushri, an image of Manjushri, two disciples of Buddha who comment his sutras related to the graduated path, this extended lineage explained by Buddha Maitreya. Instead, Manjushri talks about the essence, the other lineage, which is called the profound lineage. And then there are two more images. To the right of Maitreya is Asanga, and to the left, to my left after Manjushri is Nagarjuna. Asanga wrote a text called Labi Samaya Sankara, which is a commentary to the Sutra of the Perfection of Wisdom, where he takes the Sutra of the Perfection of Wisdom and divides it into 60 main points and explains the graduated path to enlightenment. If one wants to reach enlightenment starting from zero, what does one need to do? He explains it step by step. The more user-friendly version of Labhisamaya Lankara is known as Lamrim, which is this graduated path to enlightenment. And there are different texts, some that were first written by Atisha here on our right with the red hat, and then described in more detail by Lama Tsongkhapa here with the yellow hat. But they make reference to what teachings? The teachings of Asanga. This text called the Ornament of Clear Realizations, where he explains in 60 main points, step by step, from where one is to the end, what one should do to reach enlightenment. He describes this all very in detail. I had the great luck of studying this in detail. The text itself is not very long, but the first four, just the first verses took a year just to remember. Just to leave some kind of imprint. These are the first lines of the text of Asanga. On the other side, so Asanga wrote 5 main texts that talk about this graduated path, and everything that comes after are commentaries on this perfection of wisdom. On the other side, Mandrushe commented the same, Nagarjuna commented the same sutra, but taking the interpretation regarding the correct view of reality, going to a more deeper understanding of the sutra itself. And even here, Nagarjuna wrote many texts, one called The Root of the Middle Way. Uma Tsawat commented by Chandrakirti, by Lama Tsongkhapa, and then there's a user-friendly version within the Lamrim. So today we have these teachings that come from this lineage. Just trying to give you an idea, because what happens today is that often when we get close to Buddhism in a modern way, let's say, often we have this idea that it's a kind of some kind of Eastern psychology, and which is fine. There are positive aspects about that, but it's like, how can I say? I don't know how to say. Well, behind all this, there's a path of lineage and transmission. This a whole source of wealth that we completely ignore. So often what we access is the version, but it's the kind of Buddhist for Dummies version. Excuse me for putting it like this. But how can we get to the essence, a level, so that we can use this essence and apply it to our daily life? But behind that essence, there's a whole world. So the Sutra of the Perfection of Wisdom talks about the more reduced version, the essence of this commentary of the Sutra, the Perfection of Wisdom, that has to do with the nature of everything, the profound view, the essence of these teachings. In other words, what is the new paradigm that Buddha gave us, and how can we go from our own paradigm where we are to this new paradigm? Okay, are you following? Now, I will read and give you the transmission of the sutra. As I said before, Buddha he didn't leave anything in writing. It was all oral. And even afterwards, when they wrote it down, that oral transmission remained more important. So the written version is a kind of backup to make sure that everyone has that same version. But the real transmission is not the written version, but the oral transmission. And even today in Tibet, the oral transition of all the sutras of Buddha is alive. There's even a master in Tibet today who gives the oral transmission of all Buddha's sutras, and Lama Ganchen had invited him here to do this for the first time in the West. He accepted. Very, very few are able to do this. Number one needs to have received these oral transmission. The second thing, you need to have this ability to speed read. Otherwise, it'll take years. It would take years. To give you an idea, one volume would be about 1,500 pages, and this master is able to read out loud without without skipping a word. He's able to read 8 volumes a day. It's crazy. When we asked him, he said, "Yes, I'll come. I'm available to work hard." We need about a month of transmission from dawn to dusk with an hour for lunch. If you can follow, I'll come. And we're still trying to make all the permits to allow him to come, and we hope that he can come, so we can maintain also this oral lineage. So today, instead of giving you the transmission of all sutras, at least we give you the transmission of the Heart Sutra, which I received from many of my masters, Lama Ganchen Rinpoche, Kyabche Trijang Rinpoche, from Dragon Rinpoche, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, many, many masters, and now I share with you. During the transmission, imagine simply that there's a flow that goes from Buddha Shakyamuni, from generation to generation, all the way to me, and from me is transmitted to you. I'll read it in Tibetan, which is the language in which I received it, and then we'll look at the translations.
Chomdende mashirake bharatu jimbe nimbo shu so gyagarakedu bhagavati Prajnaparamita hridaya bhukedu chomdende mashirake bharatu jimbe nimbo chomdende mashirake bharatu jimbala chatsalo digedake deba tuyechina chomdende gyabokab chago pomborela gelonge gendo jimboda janjo zembe gendo jimboda tabuchido jude teitse chumdende samayunama shechawe choki namraki tinge zinla nyambra shuso yang teitse janjo zemba zemba jembo baba jereze wanjo ki shiraki poro tu jimba samo cheba nila namra tashi pupo ngabo deda kya de da laya ranshingi tomba namra tao tene sangye ki tu tsedan demba sharipu janjo zemba zemba jembo baba jereze wanjo la dike cheme so rigi puan rigi pomo kanla la shiraki poro tu jimba samo cheba chebar deba de jidar la barcha Teke che me badan jojo zemba zemba jembo baba jereze wanjo ki tsedan demba sharata di pola dike che me aso shari po rigi po mokan la la shera ki poro do jimba samo cheba chuba chebar deba te jidar nambar tawra chate pombonga bo deda kya ran shingi tomba nambar yan dabra che su tao su tomba o tomba ni su le kya tomba ni shema yin tomba ni le kya su shema yin no te shin tu tsorwa dan dujeda nambar cheba nan tomba o Shariputra tedavena che tamche tombani de tseni meba ma keba ma gaba trima meba trima dan trawa trewa meba kama meba o Shariputra tedavena tombani la sume tsoro me duje na me nambar cheba me mi me nawa me na me che me lume ime sume drame trime rome recho me recha me cho me to miki kame ba ne yiki kame yiki nambar chebe kanki pardo yame to ma riba seba meba ne kashi me kashi sebe pardo yame to 대신 또 동해 와당 군주마다 고바다 라메 예셰메 도바메마 도바야메 또 샤리부 대다베나 전조셈바나 도바메 베치 시라기 버르도 짐발라나 시라기 버르도 짐바 사모딜라 넘버다 딜라 텐치 네데 심라 디바메 진 라바메데 친젤로레 신도데네 냥엘레데 타라 진도 튜순동 엄버 쇼베 상게 탐제켄 시라기 버르도 짐발라데네 라나 메바얀 다브르조베 전주동 엄버 조바 상게소 대다웨나 시라기 버르도 진뱅아 릭바 진뱅아 라나메뱅아 미냠바단냠뱅아 동해담자랍 주시버 제뱅아 미즘 베나 덴버 셰버차데 시라기 버르도 진뱅아 메바 다야다 가데가데 파라가데 파라삼 가데 보디스워 샤리포 전조 셈바 진보데다 시라기 버르도 진바 사몰라 라브차오 데네 좀는데 띵에진 텔레젠데 전조 셈바 진보 바바 제레제 원조라 렉소 셰자와 징님 렉소 렉소르기 포데 대신 어때 대신 대게 달교게 템바 대신 도시라게 버려도 짐바 사몰라 체버차데 대신 셰바남게 제소이랑어 춤된 되게 체카 테네 세단데 마샤라다데 보다 저조셈바 쳔보 바바 제레제 원주다 담제단데 거로데다달 하다미달 하마이다 제사라 제베직데 이란데 춤된 되게 숨발랑 엄버라도 돈 춤된 마샤라게 버려도 짐베 님보 조소
Repeat after me.
Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhi, Soha, Tayata, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhi, Soha, Tayata, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhi, Soha.
Okay. Let's imagine the following. Someone wants to learn to learn perfectly how to play the piano. Another kind of musical instrument. I know how to only play a singing bowl. If you play an instrument, think about the instrument you play. On the first level, we need to learn the theory. We're introduced to the instrument. We're explained how we should play it correctly, make the specific notes, and someone explains the theory to us. Once we've understood the theory, what do we need to do? We need to practice. At the beginning, as I play, actually, I'm trying to diminish the distance between theory and practice. So I have, maybe first I learn how to read the music, how to play what's written. Little by little, I take that music. Little by little, I play it. At the beginning, it's difficult. And little by little, I create more familiarity. And the more I play, what happens is gradually that distance that I have between conceptual comprehension on how to play the piano, the conceptual understanding of the notes that I need to play, the music on the music sheet, and my ability to play, and the movement of my hands on the piano, that little by little diminishes. If I practice a lot, a moment will come where I'm able to play without having to read. I'm able to play without having to think about the theory anymore, like as if the instrument becomes an extension of myself and I play naturally, spontaneously. And when this happens, as I play, there's nothing other, and there's only me and the music. The instrument is not even there anymore. I become one with the music. Once I reach this level, I need to repeat that experience many times, many times, again and again, until I get to the point where I become one with the instrument, where there's no difference between me and the instrument. It's deeply a part of me, and not only do I not have to think anymore, but I just don't see the separation between me and the instrument. Is this path clear? So Tayata, the mantra, Tayata in Tibetan is Ditate. Ditate, you can translate it as it's like this. Using this analogy, it's like this, we learn the theory. We go, we study, we learn the theory, and that's the way it is. We learn the notes, we learn how to play the instrument. And once we've learned the theory, we need to go. Gate. Gate can be translated in different ways. The most correct way to translate gate is son in Tibetan, gone. But when you make the translation in Tibetan, you can translate it as having gone, and making in reference to the paramita or perfection, or going. In Tibetan, when it's translated, you can put it into two different tenses. When one is actually going beyond, or one has gone. I've learned the theory, and now I need to practice. Gate. Go. Paragate, go beyond. Go beyond what in this case? Go beyond the theory. I get to Paragate once I'm able to play without thinking about the theory, when I don't have to read the musical notes, when the sound is one with the actual music that I'm playing. Parasamgate, go even farther beyond. Yandak Pardanshi, go beyond, which means familiarize myself even more with that non-conceptual experience. Podi, Chanchup in Tibetan, enlightenment, which means this state of perfect excellence. It's when I and the music and the instrument, we become one thing. Soha, may it be so. So if we were to translate the mantra, it would be Tayata Ditate. It's like this. It's concept, it's the theory. This is what we're going to learn. And when we talk about the paradigm, that Buddha transmitted, the part of the sutra that explains the paradigm is the Tayata. Of the mantra, Tayata is where you learn the paradigm, where you learn the view, and this makes reference to the mantra Tayata. And even in the sutra, it's the shorter part. Then we have Gate Gate, go, go, or having gone. You can translate it as going, going, or having gone. Go. So two phases. As I'm going, and that moment of arrival, once I have arrived. Paramita is this process of perfecting and transformation. So wisdom is so it's the wisdom that is going, has gone towards perfection. So we take wisdom, we say Ditate. Wisdom is establishing what wisdom is. It's establishing the paradigm. Gate Gate is the conceptual process of learning, of wisdom, where on a conceptual way we familiarize ourselves more and more, but still on a conceptual way. So go, paragate, go beyond, or having gone beyond. So wisdom gone beyond a conceptual level, when it becomes a non-conceptual experience, a direct experience. Para samgate, go much farther beyond. Yandakpar means excellent, in an excellent way. So you go beyond in an excellent way, which makes reference to what? With familiarizing ourselves even more with this direct experience, to then get to this final state, which is bodhi, where the experience is natural, spontaneous, and not something that one needs to put effort into. So, Tayata, it's like this. Gate, gate, go, go. The first two gates make reference to familiarizing ourselves with, on a conceptual level. Paragate, go beyond this conceptual level. Parasamgate, even further beyond, familiarize yourself even more with that non-conceptual experience. So as a final result, you get to bodhi enlightenment, when it is natural, spontaneous part of you, when that paradigm is completely changed. So the mantra is the essence. Tayata gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhisoha. If we were to give more specific terms, here we won't get into details now. Maybe someone will understand better. but it's said it is like this. All phenomena are empty of intrinsic existence because they are interdependent, and that's the way it is. Gate gate. This understanding should be brought to the path of accumulation. That first gate, along the path of accumulation. Then you go to the path of preparation, second gate. Paragate, go beyond, is the path of seeing, this direct experience. Parasamgate is the path of meditation. Bodhi, the path of no more learning. The Heart Sutra, when we'll look at it afterwards, if you realize there are different parts where it says Sharipu. Every time it says Sharipu, it's a marker, a different part of the sutra. It's divided mostly into 4 parts. Gate gate is the first. Paragate is the second part. Parasamgate, and Bodhi is the 4th part. Or rather, this Heart Sutra is divided. First of all, we establish the paradigm, the correct view of reality. And then once that has been established, how can we train? How can we transform our own paradigm from gate gate on a conceptual level, paragate non-conceptual, parasamgate, where we deepen our non-conceptual experience. Bodhi is our state of Buddhahood, where one has transformed completely into that paradigm. Are you following? And then you'll see in the sutra there are these various passages that, but to understand all of this, what we're going to do today and maybe tomorrow, we're going to stay on the Tayata. If we're able in these 3 days to understand Tayata well, that's already so much. Gate gate, maybe we need to wait, because before go beyond, go far beyond enlightenment, we need to understand what goes where are we going. And first of all, we need the Tayata. And here there's a verse of Milarepa that says, Tu sameba, meditating without having first listened and understood is like trying to climb a rock with a closed fists. To scale a rock or a mountain with closed fists. So we understand when we listen and things make sense, and we listen and we're able to understand. When we understand ourselves, it's no longer just a repetition of something else. Once it's our own, then we can go on to the next gate to familiarize ourselves even deeper. So Tayata, it is so. So how are things? An easy way to see how things are, a way to understand how things are, is by looking how things aren't. How we perceive and how we experience reality and things. So let's see. I'm going to use the same examples that I've used many times. But let's start with a different example. First, let's imagine that we're in front of a mirror. When we're in front of the mirror. Let's imagine that we're in front of a mirror. We open our eyes. What do we see? Without philosophizing, we see our face. We see ourselves. I asked, do you see yourself in the mirror? The answer would be yes. So without analyzing or philosophizing, the natural appearance of things when we look into the mirror, what do we see? We see our face, ourselves. But now, let's analyze a little bit and we ask ourselves, has anyone here actually seen his or her own face? When we seriously think about this, it's quite shocking. Because what do I see in the mirror? Do I see my face or do I see the reflection of my face? It's a light that touches my face, that reflects towards the mirror, and from the mirror this reflection comes back to my eyes. Let's imagine if our whole life we've always used curved mirrors. The image that we would have of our own face would be fatter or thinner depending on how the mirror is curved. And what would happen instead if it were a yellow tinted mirror? We would think that our face were yellow. But the only thing that we've seen of our face today is the reflection in the mirror, the representation in a photo or a film, a video. None of us has ever seen his own face, excluding maybe the tip of your nose. Do we agree? Let's stop. Let's just rest on this concept for a minute. Let's try to digest this idea that we've never seen our own face. And we go in front of the mirror. What is it that we see? Okay, I understand that it's not my face, but how does it appear to me? As if I were seeing my face, right? But is it my face that I'm seeing? No, it's not. All of reality, there are two aspects, everything that we perceive. There's one aspect of perception that's called appearance. That is the way in which we naturally perceive things. But with all of this appearance, if we don't analyze and research, it seems like it's all working and functional. But when we analyze and we deepen, we see that reality, what we perceive, doesn't correspond actually with appearance, like how we perceive things, even from a point of view of physics. If we don't analyze, it seems like everything is very coherent with appearance, but there's movement, there's void, there's so much that's happening that goes beyond our own perception. So when we say dittate, tayata, it is like this. We need to look for reality beyond appearance. And reality beyond appearance, we can see that on 3 levels. They're called the 3 levels of interdependence. Let's start with the example of sound. When we hear this sound, our experience of the hearing of the sound and the sound itself, is it something that to exist needs to depend on different interactions? We need the object. We need the meeting between the stick and the actual singing bowl. We need the air and the atmosphere, because if I play the singing bowl outside of the Earth's atmosphere, you wouldn't have this the sound. Does sound exist in space? Why doesn't sound exist in space? Because the vibration cannot dissipate throughout the air. So for there to be sound, we need the contact between the stick and the singing bowl, the vibrations in the air, and these vibrations touch something else, the walls, the ceiling, until before it gets to our hearing. I mean, what happens within the hearing is very complex. Is there some kind of doctor here who can explain all the little crystals and all the mechanics of the hearing? I mean, there's so much happens within the eardrum. I mean, just one little part that doesn't work well, then one cannot hear. So there's an enormous amount of things that happens within the hearing. It's like a watch, with many parts put together well, and when they work, it all works. But with just one part that's damaged or not working, then it doesn't work. So we need all the parts. We need the stick, we need the singing bowl, we need the atmosphere, we need the actual material hearing system, and then we also need our sense consciousness, that part of our mind that perceives the signals that have arrived from our hearing and says, that's this, that recognizes as a sound and on which we give a value to it. It's a singing bowl. It's loud. It's not loud. It's nice. It's not nice. So that first part of dittate, the tayata, it says all composed phenomena depend on causes and conditions. The sound that I hear is not something that's there independent from something else. It exists, the way I perceive it, through a very complex interaction. And if it weren't for every small part of that interaction, that experience couldn't exist as it does. And if we look, it's a little bit like seeing every part of reality that we experience, everything that we see, everything that we hear, that we touch, that we imagine, that we think, every feeling, every sensation, every experience that we have. Imagine those experiences. Imagine in that present moment like a kind of result of an equation. That result depends on what? On an infinite number of interactions among them. So that result doesn't exist independently from all the parts that composed it. And so it goes for every experience. This is the first level of Tayata. Reality is interdependent on a coarse, gross level. Everything that we see and perceive, experience, and our own being depends on causes and conditions. What's the difference between cause and condition? Causes are in the past. Causes are all the interactions that have come in the past. Conditions are in the present. Conditions are the interactions in the present moment. Conditions are the interactions in the present moment that interact with those of the past. For example, I have a piece of land and I plant some seeds at different times. Those seeds come from they come from a fruit from another from a tree from another land that I have. So that seed stays there for a long time, but at a certain point there's the right level of humidity and temperature, and that present moment, the temperature, the level of water, that interacts with that accumulated potential of the seed, and it starts to sprout. So once a seed sprouts, it's the result of causes that were accumulated in the past, having planted that seed, the tree from which it came, that the fruit, and the whole story of the past, because the sprout doesn't depend on water; it depends on the seed itself. So whether it's going to be a lemon tree, a pomegranate tree, or a watermelon, that doesn't depend on the temperature and the water. It depends on the seed, and very specific characteristics of the sprout depend on the seed. So if we want to plant vegetables, let's say we want a vegetable garden, it's said that for vegetables that we plant, if I want to cultivate that land and have a long-term vegetable garden, so it's said that some part of the garden I can harvest and pick, and in other part of the garden I let the plants go to seed, and then I can then use those seeds that are adapting itself to that specific that land and that temperature, etc. Instead, we have this idea that we should just go out and take everything and then buy seeds. No. But there's an enormous story behind every seed. So that that comes from that story is the accumulated causes. And in this present moment, there's water, there's the right temperature, etc., and that interacts with that potential of the seed, and the sprout comes out that little by little interacts and transforms into a plant and grows more and more. The conditions are of two types. Our own conditions and conditions of others, or in other words, inner conditions and external conditions. Conditions make reference to that which happens in the present moment. Causes is what happened in the past and that stayed as a kind of imprint or potential. Let me give you another example. I take this stick and I throw it. Once I've thrown it, I open up my hand and the action is finished. But the stick just keeps flying through the air. So it brings within itself an inertia of the action. The cause of that movement was the throwing of the stick, and then it can just fall because it meets the gravity of the atmosphere. If I throw this in space, what would happen? It would just keep going to infinite. Without atmosphere, without gravity, it would just go round and round the earth, right? But what makes it fall to the ground? Either it meets another force, gravity, or something external. Maybe before it meets gravity, maybe it runs into the head of somebody else. But what happens is when it meets another object, that meeting is the result of what? The initial throwing. And once there's the meeting, there's that throwing is no longer there, but there's the inertia of the throwing. It's called the karmic inertia, the strength of the action, and this potential of interaction, because the action is finished, but it generated a process. It generated an energy, a strength, a potential that stays. That strength, when it comes into contact with the hand, for example, or it meets a singing bowl, then it makes a sound. It would be the result of the actions accumulated in the past together with the meeting of these two objects in the present moment. That meeting doesn't come independently of all the previous movement. Let me give you another example. During our lifetime, we make different choices, the way we eat, the way we sleep, whatever it is. At a certain point, something happens, we go somewhere, we catch a cold. Let's say we get sick. That being sick, was it caused in that choice of going into that cold place? It exists because in the past there were causes that were accumulated. In other words, this present moment of anything is a result of what just happened and what's happening, summed, added to what came before, to the past. So causes make reference to the past and conditions make reference to the present. The results make reference to what is to come, what happens when these meet. So everything that we can see and hear and touch, our being, doesn't exist in an autonomous, independent way, but they exist in a very, very complex interconnection of causes and conditions. I like reflecting on the fact that we're here, for example, and if each one asks himself or herself, why am I here today? What are the things that needed to have happened in all these years up to today that determined this fact of being here today? And what are the things that if those specific things hadn't happened, would I not be here? An infinite number of things. Here, for example, we're in this round temple. Why is this temple round? Not because we researched sacred architecture and this is the best way to have a temple. No, because at the beginning of the 1980s, there was a man named Ojoni, and I don't know yeah, he had a lot of money. I don't know what he did. He liked this area, and he bought everything he was able to buy, he bought. And he loved horses and other animals. And here he wanted to make a kind of farm. And for example, now where there's a restaurant, those were the cow for the cows in 1999. Um, the then it all he he went bankrupt, and so he loved horses, and he this structure in particular was to train horses. So I th I think that he had crazy idea to make a, a cement structure to train horses. But if Mr. Ojoni didn't have all this money, didn't have this passion, didn't decide to buy this land, wasn't able to buy this land, etc., then we wouldn't be here. And we dedicate also to Mr. Ujjoni, who died a few years ago. And I can talk to you about an infinite number of things. And every detail that we have, for example, this carpet that we have in front of us, was made by our dear friend Tsetin Gyurme, in Nepal, and there's a whole story. I can talk about every image, every small thing that's here. It's here as it is, thanks to a very complex interaction of causes and conditions that have added up over time. And the craziest thing when I think about this is being able to take that small thing, that word said, that choice made, that seemed completely insignificant, but without that, this present moment would be very different. And it's the same for the life of each one of us. So if each one of us were to come and talk about the story of this present moment, why are we here? How much time would it take? An infinite amount of time. If I think about myself, how my parents met, thanks to an astrologer, actually. This is a very nice story, actually. I'm just going to touch on it. It's nice to see that this present moment it's not something that we can take for granted. It's very complex. My mother was in a sad point of her life, and even if that moment hadn't if that a moment if she didn't go through that moment, she wouldn't have gone to this professor, this astrologer, and then this man tells her, this day here, you are going to meet the man of your dreams. So make a list of all the characteristics of the perfect man. And she took it as a kind of game, a funny game. She was in her 20s, and so she started writing out this list that she wanted. Physically, she wanted him to be like this or that. She spoke German. She wanted to make sure that he spoke German. He she wanted him to go to work with a suit and tie, but also like alternative things, different things like this. And that day came around, and she didn't specifically go around looking for him, but she thought, okay, that was a joke. It took away my sadness, and this time it distracted me, and I had fun with this game. And that day, she was supposed to go to the mountains to my grandparents' house, and and her brother came round with his girlfriend and a friend of her brother's girlfriend, my father. So in the car, they start talking. What foreign languages you speak? The Portuguese, English, German. He was an engineer, and um, he was an electronic engineer. It was um, an important company at the time. Work. He went to work in suit and tie, and at the time he did many alternative things like yoga and dance. And so the thing, all the things that were on the list were present. But after this vacation that they experienced together, so my mother came back to, she went back to the astrologer and said, I met him. I really met him. I said, and the astrologer looked at her and said, you're pregnant. And she said, no, it's not possible. I said, instead, yes. And she, she called my father and said, I'm pregnant. And he said, no, it's impossible. How do you know? Did you do a test? And she said, no, the astrologer told me so. But actually she was pregnant, and here I am. And we can spend hours and hours talking about this story. But, but if they had had time to think about it, these two would have never gotten together. So the fact that it would happen so fast is the reason why I'm here. But I asked myself, if that astrologer hadn't said, or if my father hadn't been invited to go to the mountains those days, so many things, today I wouldn't be here. And for each one of us, there's an infinite number of things, and it's really beautiful to take time to see that this present moment is absolutely magical. It's magical in the sense we shouldn't take for granted. If we're here together in the middle of Italy talking about the Heart Sutra, how many things had to happen? Lama Ganchen had to leave Tibet, had to be invited to Greece. I don't want to go on and on with all the details of this story. He had to go to Brazil, where he met my parents. It's a very long story. The fact that I'm here connected to I'm here. There's a connection with milk that was polluted milk, milk powder that was polluted from Chernobyl. They couldn't sell it anywhere, and then actually Brazil was buying it, and my mother, she was part of a campaign to block the purchase of this polluted milk powder from Chernobyl. So she met these people who were part of this movement, and she met these friends, that Monica and Claudio, who then were also friends of this Professor Charette. Monica and Claudia had met Lama Ganchen Rinpoche in India, and they met him in India, and they met him as a healing Lama in this like hippie market in Goa. So this Italian and Brazilian hippie, they meet the hippie Lama healer on the beaches of Goa, and had a stand that said Lama healer. They wanted to bring him to Brazil, and so they thought, who can help? Who can help? Then they thought of my mother, Belle, who had been quite the activist because of that problem with the polluted milk powder. So for her 30th birthday, they came and they brought they had been invited, and they brought a picture of Lama Ganchen, and they asked her if she could help organize his trip to Brazil. So imagine if Rinpoche hadn't been present at that hippie market in Goa, and Claudia and Monica had never met him. I get into these details because really, when I think about all this, it deeply touches me. I'm just seeing how what we have is not obvious, and we shouldn't take for granted. And it really shows that every word, every choice, every thought, every interaction that comes doesn't end there. It's not important for the future. It actually determines what will happen, what we will experience in a close and in a nearby and a remote future. Are you following? Tayata. This first level of Tayata. Imagine what it means to live in this awareness. First of all, it means having a total acceptance of what is. Because I see that the experience of this present moment is the perfect result of an equation, but I also see at the same time, I see the power of free will, the choice of every moment. So I look towards the future with responsibility and awareness. This allows me to be at peace with my past and have hope for the future. So let's imagine for a minute that if we, in our paradigm, had total clarity of this complex interaction of cause and condition that exists. Because when we see someone, when we live a situation, what we experience appears to us as being the fruit of a complex interaction of causes and conditions, or does it just seem random? Because if I understand that everything exists in relation to this the complex relationship of causes and conditions, and I can apply that understanding to every action of body, speech, and mind, then I really understand this first level of interdependence, which is karma, and with that understanding, then there's a tremendous amount of suffering is alleviated. That's the first level of Tayata. Second level, which is also called is a gross interdependence. That second level of Tayata, so it is a subtle. The second level is a subtle level of interdependence. Everything that exists depends on its own parts. Nothing exists independently from its own parts. Let's take a book, for example. What are the parts that make up a book or a booklet? We have cover, a back cover, pages, paper, ink, words, paragraph, titles, etc. It depends. If it's digital, the pages, are there pages? What's the definition of book? So I say booklet because it doesn't seem like a book. So what are the parts that make it up? Paper, cover, pages, ink, words, phrase, sentences, etc., etc. This booklet of the Heart Sutra, does it exist independently from its parts? No. So this booklet doesn't exist independently from its parts. Let's take one part of the booklet, this cover. What are the parts that make up the cover? I can talk about, I can come from a geometric point of view of space above and below the sides, or I can define the various colors, the actual design of the mandala of the Prajnaparamita, the logo of the Nalso. I can talk about the font, and maybe of all these parts, I choose one, the title in English. So what are the parts that make up this title? The various words. So let me take the word heart. What are the parts that make up heart? The various syllables. And what about, they're the letters, okay? The last letter is T. Okay, so let's take, what are the parts that make up the T? So now here, are we talking about the written T or the sound of T? So we have this form of a kind of line, and then another line that goes, one is vertical and one is horizontal. So what are the parts that make up these particular lines? And I can go on and on until I get to the atom. From the atom, I can go to the nucleus of the atom, etc., until I get to the quantic particles. I don't know, I've never studied physics. But this definition that is given is that everything that exists in dependence from its own parts. Nothing exists independently from its own parts. We're here together. We're a group of people, and we exist in dependence of each one who is present. And what's interesting with this level of interdependence, at the beginning, it seems more mental than the first one, but it's very practical. When I see this cover, when I see the booklet, our perception is it that we see the booklet, or do we see the whole of parts? Now we see the booklet, but actually there's a whole of parts to which I attribute a name. And to transform the booklet, can I change the booklet without changing its parts? What's the only way to change the booklet? Is by changing one or more parts of the booklet. Every time there's a change in one part of the booklet, the whole booklet changes, doesn't it? So if I take this mala that I have here, 108 beads, and I make a small dot, a small white dot on one, has the mala changed? Yes. And this takes us to another aspect. A whole, a unit, doesn't exist independently from its own parts, and we cannot interact with a unit without interacting with its parts. And when we transform a part, the whole changes. And there's no alternative to this. For example, in this moment, we're here in Italy. We agree, right? Does the Italian culture exist? What makes up the Italian culture. It's a way of eating, a way of speaking. There's a language. There's different. There are different dialects. There's a way to perceive life. It's a way to have fun, a way to work, a way to pay or not pay taxes. This is an infinite number of things. There's an enormous number of things that we can list to say this is all part of Italian culture. But this Italian culture, beyond the way of eating and sleeping and dressing, these parts that make up this so-called Italian culture, Italian culture as a whole, does it exist independently from the Italian culture of each Italian? So all of us here who live in Italy, and Italian culture, is it made up only of those who were born Italian and live in Italy, or can it also include those who have lived in Italy for a sufficient amount of time? That's risky. It's kind of risky. We might end up into a political discussion. But the point is, let's say that we are part of this Italian culture, but our way of eating, our way of acting and having fun and working and thinking and voting, our interaction with institutions, all these different aspects of interacting. So our individual culture makes up the collective culture. In other words, the Italian culture exists independent of the culture of the Italians. Individual culture of each one. Individual culture of each one. What are the parts that make it up? Our way of eating, dressing, working, interacting, everything that comes under that umbrella. When I change my way of eating, am I changing my individual culture? Yes. If I change my individual culture, am I changing the collective culture? Yes. Because I am part of that collective culture. Is the Italian culture part of a world culture? Yes. So that means if I change my way of eating, I'm changing a culture even on a global level. And this is not to say, oh, how special I am. It's to show how much power there is in every action. There's no other way. The only way to change the whole is by changing the parts, and every part is made up of other parts. So when I interact with one part, I'm transform it. That transformation interacts with something else that's transformed, etc., etc. We are constantly in transformation. So if there are collective aspects that I would like to them to be different, I can't change the whole without changing the parts. So this brings us to another example, which is really practical. We have habits that are difficult for us to change, don't we? These habits are an entity made up of parts. Let's talk about the way we eat. It's the way I have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and I eat breakfast every day. If I change one part of that habit, I'm changing the whole of the habit. Like saying it's hard to be patient, to not get angry. I take all the objects of anger. Is there a level where I'm able to practice patience and get angry less? So if I interact with a small part of my anger, then I'm interacting with the whole of that habit. Every small part determines the whole. And this is the second level of interdependence, that nothing exists independently from its own parts. Everything that exists in dependence on its own parts. When we talked about the sound before, the experience of this present moment of hearing the sound, what are the parts that make up this experience? We have a sensory object, we have the sense power and the sense consciousness, sense faculty and sense consciousness, and if I change the sensory object, then the experience change. If I change my sense faculty, the experience changes, and so forth. When we find ourselves in front of a person, a situation, or whatever it is, this reality that we perceive does it appear to us as being the whole of many parts, or something that is solid and independent? How do we live it? Something autonomous, solid. This means that this appearance of intrinsic existence. Reality appears to us as if it didn't depend on causes and conditions, as if it didn't depend on its own parts. So these first two levels of tayata, diktate, so it is, it says be careful, because even if we ourselves and everything we perceive appears to us as if it appeared in an autonomous, independent way, without depending on causes and conditions, without depending on its own parts to exist, nothing is like that. Every experience, everything that we can experience, everything that exists in dependency of causes and conditions, and in dependence of its own parts, in relation to its own parts. And just to make a knot in your brain, phenomena are divided into two types: permanent and impermanent phenomena. Impermanent means that which is in constant transformation. That which is not in constant transformation is permanent. So I like sound and the definition of permanence. Kechi kechi kichik pa. Kechik means instant in Tibetan. Gi makes reference to the verb. So this instant, what does it do? So instant brings a transformation. So from instant to instant, there is transformation. This is the definition of impermanence. That which is impermanent is in constant transformation. That which is not in transformation is permanent. Let's see. What it was impermanence yesterday. The constant transformation, right? What's impermanence today? Constant transformation. From moment to moment. What will impermanence be in 1,000 years' time? Constant transformation. So the generalized concept of impermanence is permanent. Does impermanence exist or not? It exists. But impermanence as a generalized concept is actually permanent. Every generalized concept is a permanent phenomenon. So impermanence, generally speaking, doesn't depend on causes and causes and conditions, but it does depend on its parts. So, what are the parts that make up um, permanence? It seems like a trap as a question, but it's not. The part that make up permanence are so, or the part that make up the parts that make up, for example, the parts of impermanence. It's the impermanence of every one thing that transforms. The impermanence of the singing bowl, the impermanence of the mala, the impermanence of the sound of flower, for example. The generalized concept of the impermanence of flower is permanent, and it exists in relation to the each and every flower. But just to say that when we talk about that first level of phenomenon, we're talking about impermanent phenomenon. And instead, in that second level of impermanence, we're talking about all phenomenon, whether they're impermanent or permanent phenomenon. So permanent phenomena are generalized meaning, generalized concepts. So the generalized concept of a rug, for example, doesn't exist independently from all the actual physical rugs that exist. This is just a very quick side note. It's not so interesting or important for us now. So this second level of interdependence is the fact that everything that exists depends on its own parts to exist. Let's try for a moment to imagine what it would be like to live in such a paradigm. Let's allow ourselves this for a moment. What would it be like if in our lives we, in addition to knowing that in this present moment comes from the past and creates the future, so that first level of interdependence, but even beyond that, being able to perceive, not conceptually, but really, that everything that I perceive, that I live in every moment, is an infinite amount, the wholeness of parts, and because every small part determines the whole. Such an experience brings us a great sense of power and ability. You see the power in every part. We see that there's no space to victimize ourselves. Instead, to act with awareness when we realize that every part determines the whole, even in this immediate present, not just the future, but this present moment. All right? This is the second tayata. The third level of tayata Let me just take one step backwards, excuse me. Have you ever heard or have you ever thought, look, this person is not sincere because when he's with that other person, he or she acts differently. He changes according to the person or the context. Have you ever thought something similar? When we find ourselves in one situation or another, I mean, no matter who it is, I mean, we change, don't we? Why? Because we're not sincere, we're not real. because we're a little bit, we just want to show ourselves this way or that way, depending on where we are, with whom we are, or simply because we're interdependent. We put two things together, with one thing face to face. Once this interacts with that, then they both transform. Nothing exists independently from its own interactions. In this moment, what we all are, this exists independence of what we hear, what we experience, the place where we find ourselves. None of us exists here different, independently from the images that we see, the energy that we feel, the sounds that we hear, the air that we breathe. This incredibly complex interaction. We don't exist independently from the very complex interactions, the chemical interactions within our own bodies. I don't exist independently from everything I interact with. And everything with which I interact doesn't exist independently from me, because this interaction is never from one side. So when I'm with you, I exist independence of you, and vice versa. So I'm different when I'm with you compared to being with someone else. Inevitably. Right? Everything is like this. And here we were talking about the first two levels of interdependence, this fact that every interaction brings a transformation and nothing exists free from these interactions. Here we're at the first level of interdependence. But it's a very important point to understand this third level of interdependence. So if I take an object and I put it in a certain context, it changes. An object, a person, whatever it is, everything that exists, that we can see, touch, hear, every atom, every nucleus, on any level that it exists as it is, if we can say as it is, in function of its interactions in the present moment, and also based on the past interactions. This is a very important concept, because normally we have this sensation that everything that we perceive exists autonomously, and we try to put this in front of that. But actually, there isn't this in front of that, because it's already the changed object. So here, today I'm in front of you, and tomorrow I'll be in front of someone else. But the me of today in front of you is going to be different from the me tomorrow in front of this other person, because I don't exist independently from my own interactions. But we have this view of an autonomous, independent entity. And so this independent, autonomous entity of self interacts with this person, interacts with that other person, goes to the mountains, goes to the beach. No, this doesn't mean that I don't exist. I exist within the interdependence and with these interactions. So I don't exist I don't exist independently from all of my interactions of every kind and with everything. Okay? Are you following? Even when we hear I don't exist, the self doesn't exist. No, the self exists. Because if the self didn't exist, then there wouldn't be who speaks, who listens, who performs the action, who experiences the result of the action, who experiences suffering or joy. What would be the meaning of all of this? The self exists. What doesn't exist is the self that exists, that appears to us spontaneously. The self that is autonomous and independent, that exists independently from everything. That paradigm, the self of that paradigm, doesn't exist. So appearance, like the face in a mirror, we can say that it exists. But if I analyze, I look for it, we see that it doesn't exist. This self that does every action that exists autonomously apparently exists. But if we really look for it beyond the appearance, we won't find it. Okay? So tayata, dictate. We depend on causes and conditions. We depend on interaction. Nothing exists independently from its own interactions. And there's another important term. When we say interdependence, sometimes it feels like that there's a wrong understanding of interdependence. For example, someone put this image of a dragon, and here someone put this flower. So the dragon talks to the flower. I'm looking at you, you're looking at you, we're nice together. So I could say that they're interdependent, one interacts with the other. No, this is not what interdependent means. Interdependent means the dragon, in this context, does not exist independently from the flower, and the flower that is there doesn't exist independently from the dragon. They are mutually dependent because they depend on each other. For example, let's say we put two cushions, two chairs in front of each other, and we sit down on one cushion. We say this cushion, and the other cushion that's in front of us is that cushion. Okay. I get up from this cushion and I sit in that cushion. So that cushion then becomes this cushion, and this cushion becomes that cushion. The antique example was this mountain, that mountain. So this and that exist. They don't exist independently from each other. They're mutually independent. They're mutually dependent. This singing bowl, is it big or small? For me, it's big.
È grande o è piccola?
I'm just asking. It's not a trick question. Is it big or small? In your opinion, it's big. Why, according to us, this singing bowl is big? Because most singing bowls that we have as reference are smaller. So big and small don't exist independently from each other, but they are they're mutually dependent. Short and a lot and a little, short and tall, long and far and near. So one cannot exist without the other, and vice versa. They're mutually dependent, and then we can say they are interdependent if they're mutually dependent. And that doesn't mean that the two autonomous entities that talk to each other. the interdependence means that these two entities exist. They exist as entities, but they don't exist without the other. I'm here, you're here, but in this moment, I don't exist independently from you, and you don't exist independently from me. So we are mutually dependent on each other. We are interdependent. And a great error that we do in life in general, and even in science, it seems like they make this mistake, this looking to understand something autonomous or from its interactions. So I try to analyze this thing in an objective way. So what is this independently from its interactions? It's not. Nothing exists independently from its own interactions. We are all interdependent. Everything is mutually dependent. So now let's go to the third level of interdependence. Let's go back to the booklet. What are the parts that make up the booklet that we saw before? We have the cover. I'm a little boring. A cover, pages, paragraphs, chapters, letters, ink, etc., etc. Now, why is this a booklet? What makes it, what makes all of these parts a booklet and not just a pile of pages? If we take this last letter that we analyzed before, the T in heart, what makes that, what determines these shapes, these lines to be a T? What is a booklet? What is a T? Let me give you let's ask another question. Think for yourselves. What are the parts that make you up? What makes you up? Body and mind. Just the summary of summary. Buddha said that we're made up of 5 aggregates. Five things. The first is the body. The 5 piles of things. So it's the body, and then 4 aspects of the mind. So we have a sensation, we have discernment, the name that we give to things, and we have the various emotions, and the composed of factors, compositional factors, and then we have so we have the aggregate of form, and then we have aggregate of sensation, discernment, compositional factors, and the last one, the aggregate of consciousness. And so Buddha said that the human, that a being is made up these 5 piles of things. So aggregate means this, like a pile of a pile of things that make up the body, and these other 4, the other 4 that make up the mind. So aggregate seems like a nicer term, but it really is like a pile of things. And we'll see this in the Heart Sutra when we read it. So we're made up these 5 aggregates. So let's think for ourselves. So we can say, in essence, I'm made of body and mind. So what are the parts that make up my body? We can talk about a gross, subtle, and body, or our organs, our skin, our blood. The more you know of of anatomy, the more parts you'll be able to name. What about the parts of our mind? Sensation, discernment, memory, etc., etc. This is parts that make up our mind. Okay. Lama Michel, what am I? I'm nothing other than a name, concept, attributed to the whole of parts, body and mind. This entity. What is a booklet? This booklet of the Heart Sutra is nothing other than a name, a concept attributed to the a whole of parts that's able to sustain the characteristics and functions that define that support that name. Has it ever happened that you've gone to a museum, maybe modern art museum, and you see something and you ask yourself, where's the artwork? Not that it's not marvelous, but I'm not able to attribute that meaning to that piece of art, that piece of work. And here, just a side note, it makes me think of the frustration of an artist, because an artist, when creates art, what he has feelings, emotions, concepts that he attributes to something material so that other people can perceive that. And so from my point of view, artwork is actually a means of communication where I have these emotions, these concepts, etc., etc. I attribute all of that together, maybe to that physical object, sounds, hoping that who comes into contact with that object can come into contact with those same concepts, emotions, etc. But very often that just doesn't happen. And here's the frustration of the artist. Like, don't you see what's there? No. Or maybe I see something completely different. So what is a booklet? What is a singing bowl? What is a flower? What's a person? A human being? Every one of these things and everything else is nothing other than a concept together with the characteristics and functions attributed to a whole of parts. Attributed by the observer, by whatever being that has this ability to perceive and elaborate. Every observer has a different level of understanding and let's look at the sound, for example. What is sound? When we hear the sound of the singing bowl without analyzing, we all hear the same sound, right? But if we look a little bit deeper, the sound is the sum of the object, the sense faculty, and the sense consciousness, and then the part of the mind that labels what it is. It's beautiful. It's it's a singing bowl. It's a nice sound, a not nice sound, and then maybe together that brings out also emotions. But we bring many ideas labeled to this same sound. And they're all, what we attribute is all different, right? So this third level of interdependence is the interdependence or the mutual dependence that it exists between object of perception and perceiver. Let's look at that. Let's observe the perception of the sound of the singing bowl. If the sound that I hear and the sound that you hear is different, isn't it? Right? And not only is the sound that I hear and the sound that you hear is different, but it depends also on the value that I attribute. The sound that I hear today is different than the sound that I've heard in the past. But what happens with all of this? When I hear this sound, does it appear as the sound that I hear? Or does it appear as the sound? But actually, it exists in relation to me. So the sound that I hear, that we each hear, exists does it exist independently from the mind that perceives that sound? The sound that each one of us perceives, does it exist independently from our sense faculty and our sense consciousness that perceives it? No. The mind that perceives it, I don't mean the mind in general. I mean the mind in this exact moment that perceives it. There's a part of our mind that there's the sense faculty, but there's a part of our mind that actually is able to perceive that as sound. I'm talking about that, and that does not exist. That sound does not exist independently from the mind that perceives it. Another question, let's look on the other side. The mind that perceives the sound of the singing bowl in this moment, does it exist independently from the sound? Can we generate a mind that perceives the sound without the sound of the singing bowl? Yes or no? No. So, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? What comes first, the mind that perceives the sound or the sound? It's a wrong question. It's not who comes first. One doesn't exist without the other. They are mutually dependent. They are interdependent. Reality, the external reality, does not exist independently from internal reality, and our inner reality doesn't exist independently from external reality. They're two different appearances of the same nature. And here we break another barrier of our paradigm where we say, I am listening to the sound. No. My perception of sound doesn't exist independently of sound, and sound doesn't exist independently from my perception. We are mutually dependent. So observer and object of perception don't exist independently one from the other. Okay. Tayata. So it is. Are we able to see that we're deconstructing our perceptions, our paradigm? Let's give an example. Imagine, for example, you see an object, and your object of perception can be a place, a person, a situation, food, anything. Imagine an object of desire. Imagine something that you really like. Something that when you see it, you say, oh, how wonderful, I love it. It can be a situation, a place, a person, an object of any type, any kind. Can we find something? So it's there in front of us. Being in front of that object of desire, does it move something within? If you really have that object in front of you, physically, it will have some kind of effect. If it's something delicious to eat, then you'll start salivating. I remember in Tibet, after days and days without eating, food that we're used to, we would joke around, visualizing pizza, for example. So imagine your object of desire. How does this object of desire appear to us as being intrinsically, autonomously, objectively good and pleasurable, etc.? Or as being good and pleasurable because I attribute that value in relation to me? How does it appear to me? It's good. That's it. I mean, it has an intrinsic quality of being good. But if I deconstruct this intrinsic aspect of the object, there is no longer a solid basis of desire attachment to sustain itself. So attachment and all the other mental defilements like anger, resentment, and hate, dissatisfaction, jealousy, etc. They all function as, how can I say, as a kind of coherence, starting from a wrong supposition, starting from the idea that this object exists as it appears. This is an object of fear. This is an object of desire. This is an object of anger. It exists like that because that's how it is. So it's a wrong assumption. When you deconstruct that solid perception and you see that the object doesn't exist as it appears, it doesn't exist as an object of desire independently of the value that I attribute to it, and we really do it, that desire falls apart because it doesn't have a solid basis on which to uphold itself. An example, Lama Ganshin made this example, and I've given this example. I've used this example many times. I was in the car driving with Lama Ganshin at the beginning. In the early years, I used to drive often with Rinpoche in the car. And coming from Milan to Albagnano, after you pay your toll, then there's the road goes down and then it comes back up. I tell you about it so you can remember when you're coming. So Rinpoche told this story with a lot. Rinpoche gave this example, and I'm just going to add a little color to it. Rinpoche said, imagine that you're in a store and you see something that you like. Let me say it's a jacket. I see that jacket and I say, oh, this is great. I like it. Look, it's such a nice color. I really like the material. It's really made well. And when I say I like it, what the consequence of I like it is I want it. Okay, we're Buddhists. We're not supposed to follow desire so much. I don't just like it. I need it. We create a kind of need. I need it because next week I'm going to a party. It's a wedding, and I know that this person, this person that I really want to show. I really want to look good to this person who will be there. I want to look as attractive as possible. And I have those pants. I have I already have the pants. So this jacket would go really well with the pants, and I don't have another jacket, so we're flirting a little bit with this jacket. Oh, this jacket, I want it. And we're imagining ourselves at the party, dressed with this jacket, with this person at the party. And the more we imagine it, the more that jacket becomes a need, becomes a solid object, something that's really going to help us along um, uh, our path towards happiness. As we're there with the jacket, by chance, that person that we wanted to look good to comes by, and says, "Oh, hey, you're here too. Nice to see you," etc., etc. And here we are. There's that person is there, and this jacket. This person says, "Oh my God, what? How horrible! You really need to be courageous to wear something like that." So if someone wears something like this, is really a great sense, a great show of ignorance, because I mean, someone who would spend all that money on something that is so badly made. I wouldn't be seen with someone. I wouldn't be seen with someone wearing a jacket like that. And then, ciao, ciao, have a nice day. So that person's gone, and here we are in the shop, just us with the jacket. So has that jacket changed? Is it still an object of attraction? Do we say? Maybe we're feeling proud and we say, well, even if she doesn't like it, or he doesn't like it, I still want it. No, that the value attributed to the jacket has changed, and we just don't want it anymore. And all objects of anger, jealousy, of envy, resentment, desire, aversion, and etc., they don't exist as they appear to us in this solid, autonomous, objective way, but they exist exclusively in a subjective, interdependent way. And the interdependence, when we say subjective, is interdependence between us as the observer and the object that we are perceiving, perceiver and object of perception. When we're able to see that these emotions that are so detrimental are based on these perceptions, and we're able to deconstruct these perceptions, these emotions they don't have a foundation on which to stand. It all falls apart. They fall apart. Let me just give you one more example. What is this object? Without philosophizing, this is a bell, right? We all agree that this is a bell. Let's say the following. Let's say that from this moment on, I tell you, this is no longer a bell. From this moment on, we need to use it as a cup. Can it sustain the characteristics and functions of a cup, or not? Maybe someone says no, because when you put it down, it doesn't stand on its own. But I've seen in the airport they use these cone-shaped cups so that you don't leave them around. No, let's call it a tantric cup. The representing wisdom. So if I say this is a cup, and we use it, we add water. Maybe it's not great for anything hot, but for water. And from our experience, is it the bell that we're using as a cup, or is it actually a cup? It's a bell that we're using as a cup. For it to really become a cup, it would take a long time using it as such. But if I say, now this is now a cup, we would say, okay, Lama's a little crazy, but let's do it. But it becomes a bell that we're using as a cup. This is our perception of it, isn't it? for it to actually become a cup, what do we need to do? I need to deconstruct the image, the appearance that this object exists as a bell in an autonomous, objective way, because this object appears to us as if it were a bell in an objective, autonomous way. But a bell is nothing other than a concept, a name attributed to this whole of parts. Let's take this example and say, is it possible to take a difficult situation, tiresome situation, someone who is aggressive to us, speaks to us badly, maybe in traffic or in a long line, and use that experience as an opportunity to practice patience? Yes, and it's good, but it's an object of anger. Is it an object of anger that I use to practice patience, or is it an object of patience? Is it an object of anger that I use as an opportunity to practice patience, or is it really an opportunity of an object of patience? No, it's an opportunity of anger that I choose with awareness to use as an opportunity to practice patience, in the same way that it's a bell that I'm using as a cup. And maybe it works well as a cup, but I really see it still as a bell. And when I stop using it as the cup, it's still a bell. And in the same way, traffic, I live it objectively as an object of nervousness, aversion. And with awareness, I can say I don't want to live it badly, so I live it as an opportunity to practice awareness and patience. But once I stop putting that extra attention, it goes back to being an object of aversion and nervousness. The only way to eliminate all of that aversion is being able to deconstruct that object that object of anger doesn't exist. It is nothing other than the many cars put together, of which I am part, to which I attribute a name. But as long as I don't deconstruct that object, its intrinsic existence, its autonomous, objective in existence as an object of aversion, no matter how much I try to practice patience, I will not be able to eliminate that aversion completely. I can try to put a lot of effort to not act negatively when I'm faced with traffic, or I put effort into being patient. But once I take away any of that effort, that negativity, aversion comes back, because it appears to me as such. But if I can deconstruct it and see it really as nothing other than the whole of many parts to which I attribute a name of value, then I am choosing really. There's a disciple in Brazil, for example. She's a lawyer who works very, very hard. She was working very hard at one point. She was at home with her family, big house to manage, and her kids and the dogs and her husband. Difficult time at work, and she said it was the best time of the day was when she would go home in terrible, terrible traffic jams in São Paulo, and she would sit behind. She would just basically stay parked in traffic jam, and she would listen to teachings, and she would recite mantras, and for her, these were the most beautiful moments of her day. it wasn't a negative experience that she was trying to transform into something positive. No, she was actually living that time in the traffic jam as something positive. So it's an enormous difference between this being a bell that I'm using as a cup and using this object as, and this object being a cup. So what happens is our selfishness, and as a consequence, our anger, jealousy, envy, attachment, everything else, to uphold itself, it depend on this aspect that we grasp at that object and all the emotions that come with it, as if it existed independently and objectively. But when we can deconstruct this objectivity, then these feelings have no, these negative feelings, or these feelings have no foundation. Tayata, that's the way it is. And having understood all of this, does that resolve everything, or do we need to go far beyond? Go beyond, go far beyond. There's still work to do. That's why at the beginning there's tayata, and then after the tayata, the gate parasamgate bodhisoha. But before we start walking, we need to know where we are. So that first step is understanding how things are, at least a generalized idea of this paradigm that Buddha has transmitted. That reality doesn't exist as it appears in an autonomous, independent, objective way on every level, because everything that exists in an interdependent way. Even our inner reality, the subjective reality of every person, doesn't exist independently from the outer reality. And not only the reality that I perceive doesn't exist independently of my body, in addition to my mind. So what happens is we live in an interdependent reality where everything depends on everything else. It's very complex, but without analyze, everything exists and exists as it appears, and it seems to work. But if we try to analyze, it doesn't match at all. In other words, in every object and everything, there's an infinite number of possibilities. This object, in our view, our common view, this we call flower, is it something beautiful or negative? Depends. I can say how beautiful, somebody brought me a flower. I could say, oh, how terrible, they took this from the plant. And that nature put so much effort into making the plant itself, and nature, made this, put so much effort into this flower. Without considering the needs of the plant and nature and insects, etc. Or I can say, oh, how beautiful, that was so kind. I mean, how many different possibilities exist? How many things can it be? It's innumerable. Each one of us, when we see it, it comes into contact, we choose one among the innumerable possibilities. Our mistake is that we think that one among the many is the reality, the only reality. last thing to conclude the Tayata. There are innumerable possibilities, but can I put a label on that's not coherent, consistent with reality? If I imagine that this is a plastic flower, it's possible, no, that I see this and think that it's a plastic flower, or I walk by a shop window and I think that the mannequin is a person. Is it a person? Well, if I really, really think that it is, no, it's not. Because if I get face to face with the mannequin, he doesn't speak. If I think that this is a chocolate cake turned upside down, no matter how much I believe, if I try to eat it, it's not a chocolate cake. If I take this glass of water and I think that it's grappa, no matter how much I think that this is grappa, when I go to drink it, it's not grappa. It happened actually but the opposite. An older geisha in Brazil, very long story short, he had a glass of grappa, which is the piña in Brazil. He thought it was water, and he drank it all at once. I mean, he was sure that it was water, but water it wasn't. So there are erroneous, wrong perceptions. So when we attribute a name to something, the correct perception is when the value that we attribute and then the whole of its parts is able to uphold, it's able to sustain the characteristics and the functions of that. If I attribute a name that doesn't sustain the characteristics and the functions of that name, then it's a wrong labeling, it's a wrong perception. So tayata dictate. So it is. Tomorrow we'll take the sutra and we'll start reading it to see that first part that talks about what we just looked at. But today, try to put emphasis first of all into remembering the mantra tayata Tayata gate gate para gate para samgate bodhisoa. So gone, 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 gone beyond, gone far beyond. Soha. So it is. So gone beyond the just conceptual understanding, gone beyond our familiarization, etc. So in the mantra, there's the entire path to enlightenment that is described in these few words, and that's why it's called the mantra of the essence of the perfection of wisdom. The perfection of wisdom is the essence of all the Buddhist teachings. It's the essence of the path, the quality, the most important quality along our path. And this mantra and this represents the essence of the sutra that explains that. So it's time for our dedications now.
Svohayata yata Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhisvoha Jetsun Lame Kutse Rapten Chin Namkar Chinle Chokchur Gepadam Losan Tempe Drume Sas Drove Munsila Tatu Negyur Chi Kyawakuntu Yanda Lama Dan Dralme Cheki Pela Longche Chin Sadan Lamgi Yente Rabzone Dorje Changi Kopa Nyur Tobu Sho Nimo Dele Tsendele Nime Kuyan Delek Shin Ninsen Taktu Delek Pe Kuncho Sumki Chingi Kuncho Sumki Ngodrubut Sol Kuncho Sumki Trashisho.
At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness.
Kyamne kuncho sumla chepa locho sampo pagyo treshipa tuje tempe trinle yarang pegedro lo zambe zebra che pandelame shela chepa kenum chechin sowa tabe tu daso kanto nebe sacho dir nedan ulpon tapso shiwat cheda trashi pewar zedu. Buon appetito.
Have a good lunch. I'd like today's, here's a technical information. Tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, I will be here to talk, but today not. If there's someone here that's here only today, then we can have a quick hello. Otherwise, we can see each other tomorrow and the day after tomorrow.